It's 9:30, Thursday the 15th of November. Good morning and welcome to Analysis. In the programme this morning, dealing in IT, we take a close look at what's on offer at computers in the city. Talking the same language, Eurosinet demonstrates there's more to OSI than meets the eye. In Face to Face this week, the Green Paper, Vivian Peters and Stelios Zagrafos dissect the duopoly review. And in Benchmarks, Dave Biggins has an affair with two power boxes from Tandon and AST. But first, the news headlines.
The duopoly review, BT's monopoly attacked as the DTI gives the go-ahead for an even more competitive telephone market. EMAP closes 3 computer magazines, another keeps running after a management buyout. And speculation from the US all this week suggests AT&T and NCR will merge their computer lines. The government has announced plans to increase the choice in the telecommunications industry, effectively doing away with the existing BT-Mercury duopoly. The review document is seen by most as a green light to many new entrants to the telephone market and a major boost to the cable industry. The main recommendations are open competition on the provision of local telephone services, including services by cable TV companies and possibly mobile operators. Provision for companies to install and run networks for their own use. The review also proposes capping BT's international call tariffs, barring it from offering entertainment services for at least 7 years, and allowing private companies to create two-way international satellite networks. We'll be looking at the implications of the review later on in the programme with Stelios Zagrafos of BIS Applied Systems and Vivian Peters of the Telecommunications Users Association.
Integration of IT with corporate strategy is a top priority for UK IT managers, while security is well to the bottom of the list. So say members of the National Computing Centre in a survey published this week. The NCC's Class B or user company members were asked to indicate the key challenges they've faced. 58% wanted to match IT more closely with their businesses, but security worried only 7%. Other important areas were service quality, meeting project deadlines and staff recruitment.
Deutsche Bundespost Telekom says it's at the top of the Telepoint League, at least as far as user numbers go. Less than a month ago, it launched its CEPT1-based trial service. It's now picked up around 900 commercial users. It claims to have the lead on the 3 UK operators, all of whom launched their services a year ago. Still to launch is another UK Telepoint service operator, BYPS.
Revelations of a different kind now as we go over to the US and Las Vegas for Comdex Fall. Comdex is a computer trade show held twice a year. More importantly, it's a world stage where the industry's gurus gather to issue statements of direction and to launch new and exciting products. Well, that's the theory anyway. Well, today's the last day of the show, and Mike Hannah-Witherden is Computer Channel's man on the spot. I have him hopefully on the line now. Mike, hello.
Good morning.
What time is it over there at the moment?
It's nearly 1:30 here.
Oh, it's not too bad then. You'll have a quick shut-eye after our chat this morning then.
I hope so. I'm actually speaking to you from the Holiday Casino on Las Vegas' famous strip, and Comdex is due to open its doors again in just about 7 hours' time.
So what are the hot topics this week then?
I think the hottest property at Comdex this autumn is all Microsoft Windows related. I think you could say that this type of graphical user interface is set to shape the way we interface and use PCs in the coming decade. 4 applications come to mind as good Windows applications that keeps the user within the Windows environment. Traveling software, which are well known for their lap link programs, have launched WinConnect, which allows you to connect a laptop to a desktop running Windows with some advanced file features. HDC Computer Corporation, which helped the WinConnect product come to market, has done some cross-licensing with traveling software, and this allows them to offer a lot more Windows applications like icon designers, so people or VARs can add their own icons.
Has Bill Gates, obviously the head of Microsoft who produced Windows, has he made any important statements on Windows?
I think it was very much carry on as before, and I think it was basically saying to the assembled thousands of people here, both for his press conference, which has been taped so people can buy videotapes of it as well, is the fact that the Windows really is here, and it's just not Microsoft saying it, because there is a vast stand with other companies than Microsoft showing Windows application within a Microsoft Windows area.
Is there were there any political statements being made at the show? Very much the launch pad for a lot of things, but certainly in the middle of a major recession in terms of computing.
I think a lot of American companies were jumping on people immediately they came on the stands if they had a European badge on them. They're certainly very aware that the European marketplace is not going to be so severely affected in IT buying as the American marketplace is now.
In terms of hardware, we heard here there was a major influx of very powerful workstations into a traditional PC area at the show.
Yes, certainly workstations with a lot of RISC technology is enabling them to bring the cost down but the performance up. And I certainly think that the workstation area is going to get ever more competitive as applications get migrated up from the PC arena.
Any particular points on Unix? Obviously you covered the SCO forum event not so long ago for us. Any evidence of people looking at shrink-wrap units on low-cost PCs?
Certainly, I think the major focus on Unix is also the PC manufacturers, which are now offering a lot more configurations which suit the Unix operating system. Of course, SCO have their own graphical user interface, which is Open Desktop. But also, New Wave from Hewlett-Packard is being shown here, and that is another area where I think Unix will get the look and feel of a DOS desktop, but will have more power behind the scenes.
Mike Hanna-Witherden, thanks very much for joining us this morning from Las Vegas.
Thank you.
Well, that show should end tonight. It normally goes on from about Tuesday to Thursday evening in America. It usually sets the scene for what we'll see over in the UK later on this year and certainly for the first half of next year.
A new transatlantic high-capacity fibre optic cable is on its way, built by British Telecom and US company MCI Communications Corporation. Called TAT-10, the cable could transmit at a rate as high as 2.4 gigabytes per second and be able to handle as many as 150,000 calls simultaneously on each fibre pair. It's expected to go into service in 1993 and will help relieve capacity shortages. Traffic is currently growing at between 15% and 20% a year.
Well, the finance sector is still one of IT's biggest spenders despite the current economic difficulties. So what are computer suppliers doing to get its business? Well, we visited the Computers in the City exhibition this week to find out how well computer technology lends itself to the world of finance and some of the current problems that are cause for concern.
It seems the financial world can be turned upside down virtually overnight. The slightest fear in the markets and all hell can break loose. Well, here at the Computers in the City show, the computer world is out to demonstrate to the financial institutions and the traders that technology can play a major part in helping you keep one step ahead of the competition.
The show is the UK show for the city industry, city computer industry. It tends to attract mainly the technologists from the bank rather than the end users. Getting end users to conferences is not that easy these days. On the application side, there's lots of risk management systems, integration into Taurus, the stock exchange, paperless trading system. There's also, thematically, there's the idea that banks are no longer wanting to have everything on one keyboard. They call it the keyboard concept. I think banks have moved away from that, and I think the suppliers maybe are accommodating that.
One of the tricks of finance is to know what to invest in. Hours spent brooding over company reports and brochures can be speedily bypassed using a wealth of corporate information stored, in this case, on CD.
We're specializing in company business and information, business and financial information. It's fundamental company financial data, so we have historical information on companies worldwide. We also have forecasts of companies' earnings going out into the future.
Sounds very expensive, is it?
Not really. For £13,000 for an annual subscription, you get unlimited access to the information for this fixed cost, so that you can do all the analysis that you would want forever and ever for that year for a fixed fee. There's no meter ticking, and in this case, your imagination is the only limit that you have.
Just talk us through a short demonstration that you have on the screen there. What sort of information can you call up, and how can you set the parameters of the information? Okay, and what we've done is we've looked for companies whose PE ratio is between 0 and 10, whose earnings estimates are followed by at least 2 analysts, who have a debt-to-equity ratio of less than 25%, and whose sales this year are more than 20% higher than sales last year. What we've done is we've narrowed down 5,700 companies to 39.
And from this, we can then look at these 39 companies graphically. What we've got is the first 4 companies out of these 39. We're looking at return on equity over the last 4 years, 4 companies at a time. And if all I have to do is just hit one key, and I'll get the next 4 companies that are in the set, and then one more key, we'll get the 4 after that. On the other hand, if you're looking at something like stock price movements, which is real time, this would clearly not be. The CD-ROM technology is not the right system for that, and our Lotus real-time service is much more appropriate.
At the moment, it's a spreadsheet connected to a source of real-time data which is carrying foreign exchange prices. The 11 constituent members of the exchange rate mechanism that are used to calculate the European currency unit. And basically, as every price changes in real time, we recalculate the European currency unit. And we can also, as the price changes, recalculate the sterling cross rates, for example.
And can it be used across a broad range of computers?
It's currently available for the OS2 environment. We at Lotus have provided a number of products now for other environments, Unix, VMS, and we plan to go into those markets with this product as well.
And what other facilities are available on the spreadsheet?
Well, it's possible to bring up graphical presentations of the same data. The spreadsheet also can use the facilities to access external data on the CD-ROM or online to SQL-type databases as well.
Well, now, what do we do? I mean, how does this movie start? Well, we just pull that rope. Yes, sir.
The Muppets are here in force too. No, not an idle way of passing the time, but a demonstration of the multimedia workstation.
We can handle information from 3 separate sources, all at the same time, in real time. This allows, for example, in a financial trading situation, a trader to review 3 separate information sources, all of which are running concurrently, and make decisions based on the information that's presented to him.
There's also the possibility of putting live video or perhaps recorded video onto the screen. What sort of applications does that have?
With 3 concurrent sources of information displayed on the screen, it's possible to put a video source up on the screen as well, either pre-recorded or live. This allows a trader, for instance, to review incoming video information feeds from services such as BSB subscription service or other sources of information, Reuters, who provide live video information. You can there, in real time, make decisions based not only on the concurrent sources of data information, but also on live broadcast video information as well.
If you look at the profitability of banks over the past 2 years, 3 years, it's been dismal. But that's market conditions. But technology hasn't aided that. And in areas where the business is still booming for the banks, like foreign exchange and treasury, that's where the technology has been less sophisticated. Banks have spent an awful lot on their technology pre-Big Bang, and now they are asking now, other than the recession, there must be other features, and maybe that is the rate of return on this investment is not the same what they originally anticipated it to be.
So to sum up, what's the future for IT in the financial world?
The idea that banks have to dump their dealing room systems every 5 years is hard to hold up poorly. There have been no monolithic upgrades of systems. They're doing it piecemeal now.
Sounds gloomy.
It's pretty dire.
With the current political and economic uncertainties, the computer industry will be hoping that technology will play an ever-increasing role in the financial world. It could well be that when the going gets tough, the computer will be there to lend a hand.
Now our contribution from the British Computer Society, and it's the turn of John Southall. This week he's taken as his topic the role of the Society in educating computer professionals.
The BCS has had a long and active interest in qualifications. In fact, early in the 1960s, considerable effort went into the development of curricula and methodologies for both education and training courses, many of which eventually were run by university and college departments to help practitioners come to terms with the new technology. The Society rarely got involved in the development of specific course material or in the running of such courses, but it did, and still does, get involved in the assessment of the attainment targets, which were a crucial part of those training and education processes. In particular, the Society developed a series of undergraduate course proposals in the early 60s, which laid the foundation of the first degree courses in the universities and polytechnics, and at about the same time set out a series of requirements for the sound practice of systems analysis and design and of programming. From these came the development by the National Computing Centre and the City and Guilds Institute of the training courses which have proved so effective in these areas. This type of work continues. The Society is now working on two important current areas of IT, those of safety-related critical systems and of hybrid management, setting out in each the criteria against which both course development and attainment objectives can be measured. The onset of 1992 means that the open market approach has to relate not only to goods and services, but also to the professional people in the various sectors. Part of that requirement for people is the need to see that relevant training and education and the qualifications which relate to each of them is appropriate to the European dimension. This has been taken up by the BCS on behalf of its fellow professional bodies from the 12 member states as one of a number of European-wide initiatives in a direct approach to the Commission. There are proposals to establish sound, industry-related requirements for both education and training across the community, so that, in parallel with the flow of goods and services, there will be a corresponding flow of well-trained professionals carrying a mix of ideas and skills to strengthen the overall IT workforce in Europe. A significant contribution to this is expected to come through the acceptance of the underlying principles and much of the detail of the Society's professional development scheme. Apart from the scheme's continuing success in the UK, it is now being used under license in several overseas countries, including the United States. The challenge of Europe is not simply related to the need for individual British firms or professionals to compete with other Europeans. It is also about the need for Europe as a whole to compete effectively in the whole world market. Crucial to that success must be the effective development and use of IT skills Europe-wide, and it is the Society's intention to promote and pursue the role of the IT professional in that wider market.
British Aerospace has received one of 3 satellite service licenses granted by the German Ministry of Post and Telecommunications. The other 2 licenses go to German companies. The licenses are the most liberal in Europe and will allow the companies to build and operate full two-way systems for data and television. British Aerospace, which already has a one-way license in the UK, believes it will now be able to mount two-way links between the UK and Germany. The proposals in the duopoly review may make it possible to do this anyway. The German Post Ministry expects to award 10 further licenses before the end of the year.
AT&T and NCR are thought to be talking about a merger of their 2 computer lines, but how they do it is open to speculation. AT&T has shown interest in acquiring various computer makers in the past, but nothing came of it. Industry observers say buying NCR would cost AT&T more than $6 billion, almost twice NCR's current market value. An alternative would be for AT&T to spin off its computer business to NCR. AT&T would then take an equity stake in the combined operation.
There's light at the end of the tunnel for the mobile phone industry. According to research reported in the Los Angeles Times, the full potential of portable cellular phones won't be realized until the end of the 1990s. Miniaturization and worldwide portable phone networks will enhance the performance and increase the popularity of cellular, it claims. And the development of the personal communications network is also expected to influence sales, which could grow by over 50% a year over the next 5 years. By the year 2000, says the newspaper, portable cellular phone sales are expected to be worth around $6 billion a year.
EMAP Business and Computer Publications closed 3 magazines on Monday: Connect, IBM System User and Industrial Computing. It's blaming the recession and a drop in ad revenues for the closures. 18 staff have been made redundant, but EMAP says it's trying to find some of them jobs on other titles. The ad manager and editor of 3D have agreed to buy out the magazine and run it themselves. Managing Director Lynn Lavis says it was a strategic decision to pull out of what it sees as niche markets and instead concentrate efforts on its other mainstream titles like PC User and Which Computer.
Two European telecommunications companies plan to shake up the US public telephone exchange market by merging their American operations. UK telecoms company GPT will merge its US-based Stromberg Carlson with Germany company Siemens' American arm. This will create the third largest supplier of public telephone exchanges in the US, behind Northern Telecom and AT&T. The venture will employ around 4,000 staff and is likely to have sales of around $400 million. That's £200 million.
Everyone likes the idea of open systems in theory, but what about the practice? The Open Systems Show last week saw the launch of Eurosinet UK, a group of British-based computer manufacturers who want their products to conform to open systems standards. To mark the launch, they were demonstrating open systems in action within a company and within companies. Chris Slade reports.
There's often been the criticism that technology is all very well, but on a truly international scale, an open system is very much a theory. Well, more recently, the theory has been turning into practice, and here Eurosinet is displaying the largest OSI system ever seen in the UK.
Eurosinet is unique. It's a unique organisation in the sense it's pan-European. It has been founded by leading IT vendors and system suppliers in Europe to promote the application of OSI technology. The organisation has been in existence since January 1986. Since that time, we have been actively promoting OSI technology across Europe. It has proved very, very successful. The membership now has increased to over 50 members. Because of this increase in membership, for administrative convenience and to be able to focus more clearly on local and regional marketplaces, we have regionalised the organisation. The British government has been very proactive in the promotion and use of OSI technology. However, British industry has been a little slow to adopt it. People do not buy technology for technology's sake, and in the promotion of OSI technology, we have to bring home the business benefits of the application of this technology. The most effective way we can see of doing this is to actually demonstrate typical commercial scenarios. We have two particular commercial scenarios being demonstrated here today. One is a manufacturing model. The other one is an office productivity model in which we show the way the amount of paperwork can be minimized, the way businesses become more effective and competitive by applying this technology into moving the paper mountain around.
In the manufacturing model, the companies involved are the key parts of a typical series of transactions. There's the company headquarters, the factories, the suppliers, and the bank. And using Eurosinet, they can all talk to each other in a typical business example.
In this case, the Ford Motor Company is the manufacturing company, and our model actually shows a business transaction which results in the manufacture of Escorts and Granada cars. The demonstration is predominantly one of EDI transactions, that's electronic business transactions. And the first stage is where the factory sends a delivery request to its head office asking it to purchase parts on its behalf so it can build motor cars. You can see here that they're actually asking for various plastics and mouldings for the cars. And once we've received the delivery request, we actually send an acknowledgement telling them that we accept their delivery request and we will place purchase orders on suppliers on their behalf. What happens next is the supplier delivers the goods to the factory and informs the factory by sending a delivery advice electronically to the factory. They copy us and then they send us an invoice. There's the invoice from Paul the supplier, and if I just take you into the actual items on the invoice, you will see the items which map to the original items we actually purchased with the total amounts. As soon as we receive the invoice, we generate a payment order to our bank, instructing our bank to pay their bank, transfer the funds effectively. And there's the payment order. You can see that it's rather different from the other forms because it's bank-oriented. The bank is, by the way, the Banque de Paris, and it's played by Unisys in this particular case. The payment order has gone to the bank, and we will receive back a debit advice telling us that they have taken the money from our account and transferred it to the supplier. This is showing EDI in an open systems environment. EDI for some years has been around, but often been in a proprietary environment. So this is showing that it doesn't matter what manufacturer's equipment you have, you can actually make electronic business transactions between your suppliers and your business partners.
BT is committed to offering open system solutions to all its customers, and as such we feel that being part of Eurosinet is very important to showing that commitment to both our customers and our suppliers. We're actually taking part in this demonstration by offering the administration services which are being used by all the companies demonstrating here, showing their X400 electronic mail system. And we see this as being a very exciting area, because as open system solutions continue to grow, there'll be other services being taken on board, for instance electronic data interchange as well as file transfer. So BT are going to be involved on an ongoing basis in providing all of the services and functions to make this available.
The reason we come to Eurosinet is really to prove the OSI components that we have and to prove it against the other suppliers. So it's a good testing ground for our products. And the second reason is really to promote the OSI business benefits to the users. We want to help the users get the message that there are cost savings really in terms of the overall life cycle of the projects. And I think that message is now starting to get through by virtue of us all coming together to display that message.
Well, one of the other models being demonstrated here today is the office productivity model, and perhaps you could tell me a little bit more about that.
This model, as with all the other models on the show, is taken from a real-life example, in this case Electricité de France. What the office productivity model shows you is the use of the Office Document Architecture Standard, ODA, which is part of the OSI standards that Eurosinet support. And this standard allows you to merge composite documents together from a variety of sources. So in this model, we have information coming from individual power sources, the power stations of Electricité de France, being brought together for a head office report. And you can see that on the screen. The actual model is showing you that the information arrives from a variety of sources using electronic mail. You can see some items on the screen here that represent that. And then these are brought into a composite document without any further work. So the important thing about the Office document architecture is that there's no additional work that's needed to actually do any editing.
OSI technology is developing all the time. It is not a dormant technology in any sense. There's more and more applications being added to it which give better business benefits. It is a whole growth area, and companies who grasp this technology strongly and apply it effectively will give themselves real competitive edge and will hence be very successful.
This technology is starting to be adopted throughout the world, and at present, UK industry will have to show a keener interest fairly soon if it's not to be left behind.
The OSI show in Eurosinet at last showing some practical applications with a lot of theory we've been hearing over the last 10 years at least. Well, today in Benchmarks, David Biggins is looking at two of the more powerful desktop PCs from two of the major PC manufacturers, Tandon and AST. Tandon uses a 486 chip and the AST a 386. As well as his usually complete reviews, he asks the question, do you really need the power of a 486?
Tandon is one of the world's leading PC manufacturers, and we can expect a well-designed and well-engineered product. The Tandon 486SL is not a disappointment. However, the serious PC user often has to get inside to install new cards or change the configuration. This Tandon system has 6 cover screws, 3 down each side. On this machine, one screw had been over-tightened and took 45 minutes to extract. This particular Tandon uses the 486 processor running at 25 MHz. It was supplied with a single 3.5-inch floppy drive and a 110 megabyte IDE hard disk. Inside, there's space for a further hard disk next to the floppy drive. The disk controllers and comms ports all interface directly to the motherboard, as does the keyboard. In some models, the VGA controller does likewise, although in this particular case, an adapter card is used with the Paradise VGA chip. This reduces the available expansion slots from 4 to 3. But, as so often happens with this horizontal arrangement for expansion cards, the SIM sockets will become hidden and inaccessible as soon as the bottom slot is occupied. It would be better for the user if the SIM slots could have been positioned in the space between the motherboard, between the expansion cards and the power supply. The 486 processor itself is located on a daughter board that's hidden beneath the storage devices, which makes me suspect that this is in fact a converted 386 design. Incidentally, hidden beneath the cables, there's an empty socket on the motherboard. It isn't mentioned in the documentation, but it looks remarkably like a 287 coprocessor socket, which would be surprising in a 486-based system. What surprises me most about this tandem is the limited onboard RAM capabilities. The 486 is really overkill for general-purpose desktop computing. It'll really come into its own running Unix or OS2, but in both cases, 4 megabytes of RAM is rather meagre. The AST Bravo 386SX is an SX-based desktop PC. The system supplied includes a 40 megabyte mini-scribe hard disk and a single 5¼ floppy disk drive. The first thing to note is that the Bravo scores more favourably than the Tandem in its physical access. There are just 3 screws to remove from the rear. The next point is that it has a surprisingly small footprint for a system of its capabilities. This is achieved by a very tight and tidy system architecture combined with fairly minimal basic features. There is space, for example, for just one more storage device underneath the existing 5¼ floppy drive. The total internal storage configuration could be 1 floppy and 2 hard drives, or 1 hard and 2 floppy drives. There are just 4 expansion slots, and one of these is occupied by an AST VGA Plus card with a Paradise chip. Everything else is interfaced directly to the motherboard, but this only includes a single serial port, 1 parallel port, and the keyboard. There's no mouse interface and no 9-pin comms port, a new standard that's becoming increasingly popular. The motherboard is reasonably well designed. The 386SX processor is soon hidden by any expansion cards, but then you don't need to touch it. The 3 areas that you need to reach are the 387SX coprocessor socket, the RAM SIM expansion sockets, and the empty ROM sockets. In this particular configuration, these are perfectly accessible and would remain so until a full-sized expansion card were installed. The 2 ROM sockets, suitable for optional ROM-based software, will remain accessible regardless of the installed expansion cards. The SIM sockets can take up to 4 megabytes of onboard RAM, but the system will support a total of 15.5 megabytes through RAM expansion cards. I'm a little concerned by the mounting of the internal hard disk. AST have fitted it over the power supply, and I can't help worrying about the possibility of overheating. All in all, the AST Bravo 386SX is a neat and tidy desktop PC for general PC applications. It can be described as at the upper end of the general purpose scale, but perhaps not sufficiently powerful or versatile for the more demanding power applications. The Tandem is a solidly constructed system with limited expansion capability and fairly limited performance. It's one of the slowest 486 systems I've seen, and in many of the tests is not just outperformed, but outclassed by some of the competition, such as the Comart 486 Tower. Indeed, the 386-based Apricot Key just about matches it on most of the tests, apart from the pure floating point calculation. Its disk performance is particularly disappointing, and I can't help wondering if Tandem have got the drive interleave right. This is even more surprising when you remember that Tandem's SX machine is near the top of its class. I think that a machine as powerful as a 486 needs a good disk system, such as the DPT. The 486 is too good a processor to be let down in this way. The AST Bravo is a good, powerful mid-range SX system. It compares favourably with the pack, with perhaps a small question mark over its serial disk performance. Its processing is a little weak compared with some of the other SX machines about, although the CompuAdd system shown in the graph here does have a 387. Generally, it looks like a good buy, particularly for small database applications. Its random access disk performance was not bad at all.
As we said at the start of the programme, the duopoly review proposals are out. Now to discuss the Green Paper and its implications, here's Ken in Face to Face.
Well, we're joined by Stelios Zagrafos from BIS Systems, BIS Applied Systems rather, and Vivian Peters from the TUA. Well, Vivian, generally good news from a user's point of view. Was that your overall reaction?
Yes, we were very pleased to see the document and that it isn't particularly prescriptive. Brian Carlsberg is asking generally what the industry is prepared to provide and what users want. And I think there's something in there for everybody. So yes, we're very pleased about it and we'll be responding very fully.
Your first reaction, Stelios, when it came out?
Very positive. I see it as being good for British industry, to help British industry be more cost competitive in the marketplace, and clearly telecoms is a key enabling technology. The increased choice of services that will be available, high quality services, innovation, greater competition through telecoms, that's got to be good for British industry.
Let's look at some of the key points. Firstly, the cable industry was lobbying hard for protection of its markets. It seems to have got that. Do you think now we're going to see increased investment and cable's ability to offer telephony?
Yes, and I think the fact that Section 15, it looks as if Section 15 of their licence is going to be removed, which means that they're going to be able to install their own exchanges. Now, why that is important is that they'll be able to then interconnect with other franchise areas, and also with British Telecom and Mercury. But what we want to see from this duopoly review is equal access, and that is the key to further competition and exploitation of choices for the user. So as far as cable television is concerned, yes, we're absolutely delighted at the way that's been seen. But we've also got to look at the other technologies which can actually interconnect with cable television, the mobile communications networks, the fact that mobile operators have been given the option of putting inland links. And once again, it's this general interconnectivity which is very important, because this is what will drive down the tariff and will make the new operators competitive with British Telecom and also with Mercury.
I noticed Rakel's share price has been rising. I mean, do you think it's as a result of Sir Ernest trying to break up the company, or as a result of the duopoly review in terms of the mobile having a piece of the cake now?
I think both factors have to be influential. Certainly there was concern within Rakel that the value of its share price didn't reflect the value of its holding in Vodafone, and so the breakup will help retrieve some of that capital value. Additionally, it offers Vodafone new business opportunities, so that's got to be a good stimulus as well. In fact, thinking a little more widely, the proposals for the cable companies remove one of the monopoly areas that British Telecom have been retaining up until now, that is the local loop, the local subscriber end. In practice, for the vast majority of the country, BT has had no competition, and now the cable companies can offer real competition over the course of the next few years.
How do you think it'll affect the average domestic user? I mean, are we going to see a change quickly? That the Labour spokesman Gordon Brown really felt it didn't go far enough in terms of ensuring quality of service and ensuring phone lines for the millions that, according to him, don't have telephones.
I think what you've got to take into consideration is that infrastructures take a little while to put in place, and 70% of the country is now franchised for cable television, and we do have 3 licenses for the personal communications networks. Now, to get these networks in place, I think we're looking at between 2 and 4 years, so it's going to be a gradual impact. But yes, we're going to see an impact to the residential customer, to the small business user. What I hope that we'll see is that you'll be able to actually make a call without being able to use BT or Mercury at all, because you'll be able to hop between franchise holders. And this is why I was making the point that this interconnectivity is important, because the tariff implications are related to this. So but it's getting the infrastructures in place, and this is going to take a little while. I think that's what the Labour Party were making. That was the inference they were making. But I mean, quality of service has got...
It's software, isn't it, within the exchanges to allow that equal access? And,
yes.
I mean, how much of that is a problem? Because we've seen enormous problems over the software on installing System X exchanges. Do you think
I
BT will drag their feet?
I think in a way, BT won't be supplying the software will be supplied by the by independent manufacturers. I think to some extent BT have helped through the teething problems, and in fact the cable television companies and other operators are going to benefit from British Telecom's resolution of these problems. But it is getting these infrastructures into place, and it will take about 2 years, I think, before we see an impact on the tariffs and the quality of service on the local loop. But Stelios is quite right. That is the important thing about this review, is competition on that local area.
Yeah. Let's look for a moment at new entrants, new players. British Rail made a lot of noise before the review and commented very quickly after it that they were keen to get involved. What sort of involvement, Stelios, do you see from them?
I can see that they will provide quite a viable competitor to Mercury particularly, and to BT on the trunk network. They have an extensive trunk network which exceeds the geographical coverage of that of Mercury, so they offer real alternatives to both the main carriers in linking up cable companies and indeed providing services, trunk services, following on from the equal access. So I see it's got to be good. British Rail responded very quickly, as you said. I can see other public utilities being very interested. The distribution companies, electrical distribution companies, British Gas, the water companies, they can all have a role to play if they believe there's a market there for them.
The question of Telepoint is one that we've raised on this programme and in the press generally. Their performance hasn't been seen as good. There's a small paragraph there in the paper about taking comments on what kind of role Telepoint can play. It seems very wide open within the paper. What's your view?
Well, I think Telepoint will only have an application if it's two-way working. At the moment, you can only make outgoing calls. Once it's two-way working and the 4 network operators can interconnect with each other, I think there is a great role for them to play in competition on the local loop. So I think that's what Sir Brian Carlsberg is setting that scenario. I think overall the scenario that's being set from the paper is it's really an evolution. We don't actually know how it's going to evolve until we see which players come forward. And just picking up on British Rail, it may well be that British Rail don't go for a national network. We would prefer them not to as an association at this time, because we actually feel it may very well cripple Mercury and stop them evolving further, and we were left with British Telecom as the national and international carrier, and we'll be back in this de facto monopoly situation again. So I'd quite like to see British Rail working on a regional level and interconnecting with the cable companies, giving regional competition, and taking once again Kingston Communications as an example where the quality of service is 99.999%. There's practically no complaints whatsoever.
British Rail's relationship with the cable companies is a very interesting one in terms of interconnecting cable. This is something that again is very vague at the moment, or is open to discussion, quite rightly. How far do you think the cable companies will be allowed to interconnect?
As my reading of the Green Paper is that they will have considerable freedom, and they will be able to purchase interconnection services from a variety of suppliers. So I see no restrictions in that area. The other interesting aspect of the White Paper, which may well impinge in this, of the Green Paper, which may well impinge in this area, is a segmentation of retail services from wholesale services. So an authorised operator could purchase bulk services from someone else, another authorised operator, and then retail services on top. So there's a lot of choice, a lot of flexibility, and the various operators will have to think very carefully about their business options and where they're going to put their investment. But the framework does nothing to inhibit them.
And the freedom of companies to run their own networks, how are you going to advise people on that one?
I personally see that as a very positive move. As a consultant, I have a number of clients who have many offices in a confined geographical area, a city centre, for example, and the ability to install their own network and to run it, lay their own fibre, and to terminate it with their own equipment is very positive indeed, and a number of my clients will welcome that.
So to wind up, Vivian, how are you going to advise your members, or in terms of the comments that the TUA will put into the document? What sort of...
Well, we can't advise our members, they advise us. Okay. We consult with them, and from the preliminary work that we've already done, in fact, the Green Paper very much follows the submission that we made to the Office of Telecommunications and the DTI. So we've got practically everything we asked for, and we shall just go forward and strengthen our response against our initial submission. So we're very pleased.
Right. Sounds like you've really done pretty well out of it so far, anyway.
Well, I think users will do very well out of it.
And Stelios, do you think it's bad news for BT?
On the face of it, they have got little of what they asked for. I personally don't see that as a bad thing. It gives BT an opportunity to take a more considered view of the marketplace, and they can plan their investments on a longer time scale, and they can learn from the mistakes that maybe others will make. So I don't think BT loses anything. They're in a dominant position. It's good that they're being regulated at the present time, because otherwise it would thwart any competition. So they don't lose anything.
Okay, well, we'll see how their share price responds over the next few weeks. Vivian, Peter, Stelios Zagrafos, thanks very much for coming. Over to you, Clive.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on the job review and hopefully presenting an update on it in the new year. Well, 2 weeks ago in our Mobile Communications Dossier programme, we discussed the difficulties of the mobile comms industry, and particularly its hard-pressed cellular airtime providers. This week in Viewpoint, Peter Purton looks at the severe financing problems they face and says why he thinks mobile's lost its sparkle.
British mobile communications are in crisis. For the first time since the introduction of cellular radio, more subscribers are leaving the services than are joining them, and those that continue to use the networks are using them less. The bad debt problem, although there from the outset, has got worse, and so have the high debts of the service providers and their accompanying high interest rates. In October, the first service provider announced it was going into receivership. Most observers believe more will follow. Up to January 1985, and the beginning of cellular mobile telephony as we know it, there were fewer than 50,000 mobile telephone users in the UK. Now there are close to 1,100,000. The rate of growth on both networks also grew constantly, until this year. In March, some 40,000 new cellular subscribers signed on. By September, this figure had fallen to just 16,000. It is likely that more people are now leaving the networks than are coming onto them. Those that are staying on the networks are making less use of them. Market researchers Biss McIntosh estimates that the average monthly bill has fallen from some £80 a year ago to just £70 now. Even worse, the numbers using the networks but then deciding not to pay have risen dramatically. A year ago, the estimate was that less than 5% of bills remained unpaid. Today, the figure is closer to 10%. Service providers are not only finding the going tough as far as their income is concerned, their expenses have also risen. Inflation in the UK is currently running at over 10%. But perhaps the more significant to the highly indebted service providers, the cost of borrowing is rising much faster still. Almost all of the service providers are up to their eyes in debt. They borrowed heavily in the good times to finance the acquisition of other service providers, and thereby customers. Right now they're paying some 17.5% a year on these loans. The largest single outgoing, however, is the cost of the airtime used by their customers on the cellular networks. And this is a bill that must be paid. Without the goodwill of the network operator, a service provider has no business, and goodwill will only go so far. When XL Communications announced it was going into receivership back in October, it was network operator Racal Vodafone that put it there. It owed Racal a considerable sum, although not disclosed. It also owed the bank some £10 million. But XL was by no means the company with the highest debts. Its fate must be giving a lot of the other service providers cause to worry. There are a number of reasons for the downturn. the general state of the British economy must top the list. Companies are cutting back and so are their employees, but it would be too simple and too comfortable to a solution to try to make it the only reason. The system of service providers itself must take some of the blame. It is based on the ideals of maximum competition at all possible levels, and in the build-up phase of the industry it served it well. So much so, in fact, that from across the world, observers have been sent to the UK to report back to their own countries how the system could be deployed to their own economy's advantage. In good times, no one complains about competition. When the going gets tough, however, the free market economy may look less appealing, particularly when it comes to having exhausted all reserves. With the service providers, there was never that much in reserve in the first place. Many of these companies can trace their origin back to a single entrepreneur who started out less than 5 years ago with nothing but a telephone line and belief in the free market economy. The next months will tell just how solid this belief is. It may be worthwhile for those countries who are looking at following the UK model to hold off from making any irreversible decisions for a little longer, just to see how things pan out.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I hope you'll be joining me next Tuesday for our regular dossier programme when I'll be discussing what IBM's eagerly awaited case offering AD Cycle can really do. My guests then will be Jeff Hosier from Zephon, Rob Baldock from Anderson Consulting and Roger Tagg, an independent database expert. If you'd like to receive that programme, and you really ought to of course, then call Nick Bancroft at the computer channel on 071 730 2222. 071 730 2222.
And the IT headlines again. The duopoly review, BT's monopoly is attacked as the DTI gives the go-ahead for an even more competitive phone market. EMAP closes 3 computer magazines, another keeps running after a management buyout. And speculation from the US all this week suggesting AT&T and NCR will merge their computer lines.
Meanwhile though, from all of us here at the Computer Channel, it's thank you for watching and goodbye.